this presentation is really just an introduction to what's in the archives, what kinds of projects we've been doing since I've been here and moving forward, and some of the buried treasures that are in the archives that, and ways that we can make it more known how rich the archives are. Why can't I? Okay. I'm going to have to go through all of it to get to the beginning, so sorry, I'm giving it away. So I'll start from the beginning now, figure out how to flip. Okay, what do we do at the archives? We process new archival collections, written materials and objects. These are primarily unpublished materials, one-of-a-kind or hard-to-find materials. We have a small library of print books, secondary source books that you would find on local history, but the vast majority of those rows next door are filled with manuscript materials and some material culture or artifacts. The next thing we do, the most important thing, is that we guide researchers who are authors or filmmakers, students, scholars, people interested in family history. I get a lot of genealogical questions, and I can talk to you about that. Representatives from local organizations, especially the organizations whose papers we have, and people drop in, especially to do family history type stuff, or if they know we have something specific that they want to look at. They write to us or arrange a visit. We're not a lending library. There's a difference between a library and an archive. You know, a library, like the public library, you go, you check out a book, you return it. You have to use all the materials on site in the archive space. You can't borrow things. We do make copies for people. We charge for those usually, and sometimes we scan photographs or things like that to provide digital copies. We publicize our collections through our website and the websites of our partners. And we draw upon rich materials in our collections for exhibitions, programs, projects, and events. Those are the big picture, and I'm going to discuss all these tasks and show how they're related. But first, I just wanted to highlight our most important collections and common requests. The photographs that we have, a huge photograph collection, a really, really rich one, of local institutions, events, sites, businesses, farms, and homes. And I'll give the example on the next slide. We have oral histories, numerous oral histories, over 2,000 since 1968, and still developing more projects and collecting oral histories. We have special projects focusing on oral histories with Holocaust survivors, veterans, community leaders. And these are mostly on tapes, cassette tapes, because they were started in '68, a long time ago. But we're doing a project where we digitize these. We convert the tape files into digital files so people can listen to them on their computers or on their iPhones or whatever. And we usually do these for family members who request them or for events. I think Estelle played a bit of an Albert Weinberg interview for some of you on the board here. So we had an event featuring Albert Weinberg, and we had a wonderful oral history that we digitized afterwards to make it available. We have synagogue collections, a huge strength of the archives that are continually evolving. As you know, in this area, a lot of synagogues are merging and closing, and we get additional materials. So we're constantly adding to those collections. We have a huge JCC Federation archive going back a long way. And we have lots of family and individual files. Some of them are very prominent, and some of them are hard to trace. So I usually get this question. You know, people write to me, my relative, people write to me from all over the place, in the United States, in Israel, whatever. My relative lived in Hartford. What do you know? Like, what can you tell me? Depending on what the request is, we have a couple of books that help with genealogical questions about where people are buried in the area. Sometimes I get On Ancestry or one of the other archives. But we also have collections for families. Now, this gets really tricky for women, especially, genealogy is really tricky for women who married, and then it's hard to trace women because their names are not what they want. They're not their maiden names. It's actually quite tricky. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples. We had a researcher come into the archives who just bought Louis Fox's old house on 750 Prospect Street in Hartford, and she's trying to restore it to its original. So we showed her some photographs of the interior of the house. And we not only have photographs of the interior of the house, you see here the piano, the carpet, you see the moldings, the lights, the fixtures, everything, but we also have when work was done on the house, we have the construction workers, we have the invoices for the construction, so you can really figure out, what the house looked like inside and outside. These are the rows of JCC and Federation records. We have lots of them. This is an example. I wanted to walk you through how we preserve family records. So the Conover family has given us, we have a lot of family papers. The Conover family has given us a lot of their papers, and frequently we get them in albums like this, family albums. This is not going to keep well in the archive. This plastic paper, the sticky album paper, that's not gonna, it's okay for now, but it's already getting brown, and you'll see later in some of the other pictures, this is not, we have to figure out how to preserve these. So what we end up doing is we take things out of these binders, these album binders, and we put them in files, and for the photos, we preserve them in special photographic sleeves for preservation purposes, and then we put them in a box in an organized way. I just wanted to show you, so this is a family collection, one of the many that we have, but there's sort of an elaborate processing process that goes through in order to make sure that these are preserved effectively and they don't deteriorate. This is something that Susan brought in just the other day. It's a family tree. I want an example of the kinds of things that we have in some of our collections that actually provide that genealogical base for when people actually ask us questions about genealogy. So sometimes this would actually be really, really helpful for us. Because we have an entire family, and I think Susan said that nobody was actually named the head of the family, the Itzkovitz family, because there was a lot of daughters in the family, but that was sort of how you would trace the family. So this is just an example of the kinds of family collections and photos that we have from the area. So a path of a newly acquired collection, just to go over that preservation process again. A donor drops off materials and fills out an acquisition form, and I'll show you pictures of this. The archivist, me in this case, enters details about the acquisition into our database, indicating that it needs to be processed. The archivist then analyzes the material in the collection and determines how best to preserve them, especially if they include albums of photos and clippings, like what I just showed you, and to organize them. And whenever possible, preserving the arrangement of the creator. This is important because when we get organizational collections, you can tell a lot about how an organization worked from the way they organized their materials. You can tell a lot about the history of an organization from how they kept their archives. Sometimes they're just a mess. But sometimes they actually show you how an organization functioned by the way they preserve their papers. So we try to preserve that arrangement if we can, and if it's effective. I work with interns and volunteers. We have some wonderful volunteers that come every week. The Bradbards come every week and help organize collections once I figure out how they're going to be arranged. Then I create a finding aid. I'll show you an example of that, which is a detailed inventory, a folder by folder accounting of a collection. What's in every box, each folder. Not every single piece of paper in a collection, that would be crazy, but each folder in the collection, so you have a sense of the scope of a collection. And I'll show you an example of a finding aid. Then we have to publish the finding aid on the website and partner websites. And I can't stress enough, if I make a finding aid using the database, but we don't put it on the website, nobody knows that we have this material. No researcher would ever find it. It will be sitting in the archive, and no one will ever come to look at it. That's because the whole point of the finding aids is to create them, inventory what we have, and then make sure that the world knows, interested researchers knows what's here. And I know from when I did historical research, the way I found the materials to look at was by searching different organizations, searching through different consortiums and through different databases to find finding aids. And then I would go seek out those collections to do research. So those finding aids and publicizing the finding aids is crucial. Okay. So this is something that, again, Suzanne brought in. In August, we got a collection of materials, a very large collection of materials from Congregation Beth Am in Windsor, which merged with another synagogue, closed and merged with another synagogue. So Susan filled out the form here, she signed it, and then I entered it into the database that we got this new collection that needs to be processed. This is our database. It's called ArchivesSpace. Jeannie, the archivist who was here before me, worked with another database, and I sort of came in during the transition from one database to another. It's been a kind of complicated process. ArchivesSpace is a much better database, and it has a very good public interface. The problem is the transfer wasn't that smooth. So I spent a lot of time in my first month or two here basically correcting errors in the transfer of records from one database to another. But it's now transferred. Now we're all set with ArchivesSpace, so that's what we're using now. Then you organize. You put the files in the collection. This is one of the boxes, an open file box with all the collection. This happens to be the newsletter. And this is the finding aid that I created in ArchivesSpace. So you see Beth Am has 3 series parts. There's a whole collection, several folders of two full boxes full of folders of board minutes, 2 full boxes or 3 full boxes of newsletters, and then a box of miscellaneous materials that didn't sort of fit in anywhere but fit in, had some arrangement. And here you see the box with the newsletters. And this is each file is listed. This is rather simple finding aid. They can be more complicated, but hard to fit too much on the screen here. But just so you see that people will know, a researcher will know exactly where to find what they're looking for by looking at this finding aid. Okay. Then the next step is publicizing it on our website. There's this new collection available. I made a post on the website as soon as I cataloged it. Come look at Congregation Beth Am's records. And this is, the example. These are on the shelves in the archives next door. Now, important steps taken and to take. So the Beth Am, the entire finding aid is now in our database, but actually needs to be uploaded onto another part of the website, which I'll show you in a second. And as I said, I spent my time transitioning from one database to the next. The archivist that's going to replace me will need to update the finding aids that currently exist in the database with new additions to collections. As I said, some synagogues, let's say like Emmanuel, for example, we have a huge collection of Emmanuel papers and a huge finding aid, but we're constantly getting new material. I mean, Emmanuel's still going on. They're still sending us their newsletters and their activities and things like this, and their minutes and things like this. So those get added to the collection, and so the finding aid needs to be continually updated and new materials need to be added to the collection as they come in. So that needs to continue. And that new finding aid with all updated, up to date, need to then be re-uploaded onto the website and publicized. So they need to be updated and then republicized in their updated form. They're not only posted on our website, as I'll show you, but right now many of our finding aids are also posted on something called CT Archives Online, which is a consortium of a lot of archives and local historical societies in Connecticut. So somebody elsewhere wouldn't only be able to find our finding aids by going to our website, maybe they would know, but if they knew they were interested in Connecticut history and they went to this consortium and they looked up one of our collections, they would find it. I'll show you what I mean. But we still have some work to do in getting the finding aids that we have onto other databases so that they're more widely accessible. The most prominent database used by historians of the United States studying Jewish history or other types of history is something called ArchiveGrid, and we do not have enough of our finding aids on that. So if somebody came who wasn't in Connecticut and didn't know and was looking for something, an organization, let's say, as I'll talk about in a minute, the National Council of Jewish Women. It's a national organization. Some of its papers are at the Library of Congress. Some of its papers are in New York, depending on which branch. The Hartford branch of the National Council of Jewish Women's papers are in our library. Now, somebody who's writing a history of the National Council of Jewish Women all over the country would want to maybe check out the records that we have, not only the records in these other places. And the only way they would know to look at that is by looking at they would look in Archive Grid and they would type in National Council of Jewish Women, and they would find, oh yes, there's papers in the Library of Congress, there's papers at the Center for Jewish History in New York. Oh, there's papers also at the Jewish Historical Society of Greater Hartford. And so we need to get our collection into those databases too. So that's something that the new archivist should definitely take on. It's something that I've started to do but haven't made as much headway as I'd hoped. So again, using the example of the National Council for Jewish Women, if you look on our website, you'll see, and I don't know if you could see it, it's here. You see right here? So this is a list of, a partial list. There's more, I didn't put it in the slide. We've got about 40 of these finding aids on our website. You click in and you get to the finding aid for the National Council of Jewish Women. How do I go backwards? Like, I don't think I can. Previous? Okay. This is, I didn't mention this, I wanted to flag this. This is what I was talking about, Connecticut Archives Online. And you see, if you type in, search National Council of Jewish Women, you'll get, this is here. So you see, it takes you to, and it will take you to here. Okay, it will direct you to our website.
So who owns that?
This is,
Repeat the question.
oh, sorry, thank you. Who owns Connecticut Archives Online? Well, it's run out of Western Connecticut State University. That's the place that hosts it. But it's, as I said, it's a consortium of many local historical societies in Connecticut. So it's a portal. As you see, it's promoting access to Connecticut's archival resources.
Wouldn't it be good if they, instead of us, fed Archive Grid? Since that would eliminate.
So Archive Grid is OCLC, which is a larger, even larger consortium. So it would be great if we could offload the work to Connecticut Archives Online, but unfortunately the way it works now is that I or the archivist has to give our finding aids first to Connecticut Archives Online, which is a good local history resource, right, for people doing history of Connecticut, and also do the same for Archive Grid. The thing is, it's not hard. Once I create all the finding aids using the database, it's basically I just export like 40 files. And I send those files over. It's not a big deal. It's not a big job. Creating the finding aids is the big job. Once you have those things, use the database, you can just export them as files and send them to people in that way. We just have to develop a relationship with Archive Grid. I have a relationship with a person who's in charge of Connecticut Archives Online. I've spoken to him on the phone numerous times to fix glitches and things like that. But I have not yet reached out to OCLC and Archive Grid, but that's something that should be done. And here's the finding aid. If you use those links on the other previous pages, this is what you would get to, the finding aid that was created by our database. And here's, again, a detailed look at what the actual finding aid is, okay, in the database. And these are the different series, and if you would click this, obviously can't in the picture, you'd get all the folders. And here's, this is a huge collection, okay, so there's numerous boxes. But I just wanted to give you a sense of, so once this, to answer your question again, once this is created, exporting it to the different consortiums is not a lot of work. It just needs to be done. A relationship needs to be established. And again, here are examples. Now, like all the other collections, the National Council of Jewish Women is a growing collection. We just got a new box of materials that need to be now added to the finding aid, and it needs to be updated and then reloaded onto the website. It's a growing collection. That's what's hard. You create a finding aid, but you're constantly revising it and constantly uploading it again. So it's a good time. Also, the last time we really have revised and re-uploaded our finding aids was probably about 2 years ago, because we've been transitioning to this new database. So there's a lot of updating, revising, and republicizing to do to get the updated finding aids more readily accessible. Exactly. But the thing is, once we decide, okay, we are going to update now. Oh, sorry. Repeating the question. Do we have to update on all the different platforms that we're on? And the answer is yes, what we just need to do is say, okay, we're going to pick a time. It's sort of arbitrary, but let's say February. Okay, February 2019. The finding aids that we have now, as updated in the as updated form, they're going to be, these are the ones that we are now going to share. We're going to update, so we're going to send these updated files to OCLC, Archive Grid, and to Connecticut Archives Online, and we're going to update our own website. So it's basically 3 updates. And then obviously they're going to continue to evolve. But we'll say, okay, then next year in February, we'll do the same thing. We just have to set up a timetable for when these updates are going to happen, because otherwise people are going to access old and outdated finding aids. Right? And that's not particular. I mean, they're still good, they're still valid. None of the finding aids are invalid, we just have more materials than they indicate. And these are some of the new materials that need to be added to the National Council of Jewish Women's Finding Aid, and you see the kind of treasures that are within. I just wanted to give you a little bit of flavor of like the kinds of things that are in there. And the exciting thing is that this is from recent history. This is from the 1990s, this is from the 1970s. So we have a lot of material, especially recent history, that needs to get into the finding aids, because that's the history that people are starting to write. Exciting treasures to be further described and publicized from the archives. Artifacts. Over the summer, interns spent a bunch of time describing all the different artifacts that we have. And we're starting a new feature on the website called Artifact of the Month. If you go to our website, you'll see the different artifacts. This is one of them. It looks familiar. This is a potato sack. It's an interesting artifact, and we have lots of artifacts. Some of the artifacts are things like Herman Kopelman's gavel, or Annie Fisher's pen, or a piece of a tefillin from one of the shuls, the early shuls from 1900, or some plaques from synagogues. We have clothing that different people wore at Brit Milahs. We have like a variety of different things. Some of them are personal, familial objects. Some of them are more historical, like the stamp from one of the women's aid societies, their loan societies, that we have their stamp, and it indicates, their values, because it says like grace in Hebrew in the middle of it, giving tzedakah. So some of them are sort of symbolic, like this one with the Statue of Liberty. Some of them are personal, but they're so interesting. And we have the box of the ashes of the mortgage of the Manuel Synagogue. We just have a lot of interesting objects that we hope to profile one each month, again, to try to publicize what kinds of materials we have in the archives. Let me go back. Sorry. Scrapbooks. I'm just going to go through this, and then I'll get to the pictures, so I don't have to go back. Scrapbooks, these are fragile and buried in finding aids. So sometimes at the end of a finding aid, they'll say, like, we have scrapbooks. But what's in the scrapbooks is not really clear, and there's a lot of rich material. The problem with some of them is that they are falling apart. Scrapbooks are something that they're invaluable for historical research, because people did sort of idiosyncratic and thematic collections. So we have a scrapbook on sports. Somebody collected all of Weaver High School sports, fascinating stuff. One guy kept all of his fraternity and group club clippings, like all the little badges and things that were handed out all through high school and college. Some of these are, again, personal and familial, but they actually give you a good sense of also the culture of, let's say, Weaver High School, or what was going on at that time period, what was popular. We have, again, there's one album I know, I looked at it just this week, of a couple that went to Israel and kept an album of photographs from the 1940s, an interesting time in Israel history. So we have tons and tons and tons of scrapbooks, and they're falling apart, and one of the things we need to figure out is how to publicize them and also how to preserve them, which is kind of a trick. It might be something that would be a good candidate for a digitization project. How neat would it be to digitize a scrapbook and then put it on the website so people could kind of flip through it and see what it's like? And again, these are, now a lot of newspapers are, you can just go on to archives and read everything on your computer. And but there's something fascinating about flipping through somebody who made a scrapbook very deliberately on a particular topic, and you can learn a great deal that you wouldn't learn otherwise. And also, there's some publications that are obscure and you wouldn't find in many libraries. We're not talking about the Hartford Courant here. We're talking about, some small local paper that this may be the only one left. Somebody put it in their scrapbook, and that's it. So these are sort of one-of-a-kind items and buried in the archives. As I said, we need to incorporate new materials into existing collections, and many collections need to have their finding aids expanded and publicized, or researchers won't know what's in them. Like I said, we have lots of sports collections, but also some interesting newspaper collections, obscure runs, and I'll show you some pictures of these. So artifacts. So here's a scrapbook, an example of a scrapbook, and you see that it's falling apart. And this, I could have picked a more evocative page in the scrapbook, but I wanted to show you the deterioration a little bit, okay? I didn't pick the prettiest page in the scrapbook, okay? I picked a page that would show you sort of what we're up against here. This is a scrapbook from the Association of Jewish Nurses, a fascinating organization that has existed for a long time. We have all of their records, but we also have these amazing scrapbooks. And again, some of the scrapbooks some of the pages are more interesting in the scrapbooks, but I wanted to show you, so what would be the best way to preserve this? Obviously, we're not going to take the clippings off. If I try to remove the tape, the clippings are going to fall apart. So what do you do to preserve this is a bit of a challenge. We have family papers. The family of George Kramer and Maxwell Kramer, who are father of Larry Kramer, the famous AIDS activist. We have their papers, the family papers in our collection, which is kind of an interesting collection that needs to be, I think people would be interested in that. People doing research on that would be interested. This is part of the Jewish war veterans collection that is constantly, Elliott Dunn is constantly bringing us materials on individuals who are passing away, who served in different, veterans, and we have, this is the box that as he brought it in to us. Look at the files. These are all individual files of veterans. We need to get this catalog so that a lot of people are interested in doing research on Jewish veterans. It's a popular collection. People ask us about the different posts of the Jewish war veterans. So this is a collection that is sort of constantly being used and constantly being updated. These are some of finding aids that are not on our website but should be. So people don't know that they exist, and they should also be expanded, and we should say more about what these things are. This is one of our sports collections. This is our collection of, our sort of idiosyncratic collection of local Jewish papers, and some of these are really fascinating. We also have, as I said, the newspapers from the local high schools. From the period, a researcher from CCSU came in a couple of weeks ago, wanted to do research on the 1920s and the 1930s, and found our newspaper collection really, really valuable for studying that period. And so this is an example of one of the school newspapers that we have from the 1920s. We have a pretty long run of this. And the Lookout, which was I think another paper. This is from, hold on. I think it's from the Jewish Daily Bulletin, this advertisement. And the bulletin from the 1920s is full of advertisements of Jewish businesses. If you want to know restaurants, caterers, they've got every business because Jews were into everything at that time. This is just an example of a restaurant, and you can see what people ate. This is why I put it up, because you can see what people were eating at the restaurant. So looking through the newspaper is really interesting. If you wanted to know about life in Hartford in the 1920s, browsing through this, and even just looking for the ads would give you a lot of information that history has not been written. Okay, so it's exciting. It's exciting material, and it's buried in the archives, and it needs to be publicized. So in that finding aid about the newspapers not only needs to be publicized, but there needs to be a short description of what you might find in those newspapers also, so that people know this would be a great resource for studying Jewish businesses from the 1920s and 30s. last two slides. We also, one of the things I mentioned at the beginning is that we run events and we have and do lots of projects that build on our collections and publicize them. Some of you were at the New Britain event that we had a couple of weeks ago, which was fabulously attended, usually attended. And as a result of having that event, we collected lots of photos and documents, and we created a DVD, and we're currently adding material to the finding aids of the 2 New Britain synagogues that we collected after that event. So that's a kind of, and we'll post them on the website so people know that we have records of those 2 synagogues. We had a recipe day event that went wonderful. We're still collecting recipes, kosher recipes, Jewish recipes, and videos from the event were posted on our website. One of the things I was hoping to do while I was still here, but maybe the next archivist will take it on, is do an exhibit for our exhibition space in the archives room on female first in Hartford, including women professionals, community workers, labor leaders, athletes, and religious leaders. And one of the female labor leaders we were thinking of featuring was actually mentioned in the Brunch and Learn we just had. A female rabbi served at Congregation Beth Am in the collection that I showed you. I just created a finding aid for. Research on 2 other women, build our collections. And we're also thinking of doing a new oral history project focusing on professional women in the area too, and their professional lives and careers. So this is just to show you how all these things sort of connect and work together. So last slide, sort of the most important task of the archivist is to, this is just sort of repetition, processing collections, creating finding aids with a database, making them accessible to the public to facilitate expanded use of the archives. Responding to researchers' requests by phone, email, and in person. Ongoing digitization of oral history interviews and photographs, usually right now upon a sort of requested as-needed basis for events and by individuals. Selecting materials for use in exhibits, social media, and web features. Selecting projects for interns and volunteers and training them to actually help in the archives. As I said, the Bradbards have been really, really helpful. They helped with the Beth Am collection that I featured. Addressing preservation concerns. What would be the best way to deal with those scrapbooks? Maybe applying for a grant to digitize them and post them on the website. So that's basically it.